Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Rethinking with Alex Torpy. I am here to talk a little bit more about how to run for office. And today I am really pleased to be joined by Dan Zolnikov. He's coming to us from Montana. Dan and I met years ago. Dan, I think I might have gotten aware of some of your work when you were doing some privacy legislation in the legislature in Montana. That was pretty cool. So we'd love to, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're working on, and we'll take it from there.
So yeah, thanks Alex for having me. I was elected in 2012 actually, and served from 2013 till about 2 months ago, where I resigned. I got a new job opportunity. It was my last term before I termed out. And so I did 4 terms in the legislature. You hit the nail on the head. I worked a ton on digital privacy laws, warrants to go through your phone, for your GPS, some of the nation's standards, passed the strongest freedom of the press law in the nation, deregulated some industry so Uber could come into Montana. I also did energy policy, chaired the energy committee for the House in Montana for 2 terms. So I definitely spent my time 8 years as a state legislator and went through some brutal campaigns. My final one, I just ran for Public Service Commission against an incumbent, and weirdly the incumbent that he had beaten. So I did not win that one, but 4 good wins in a row and then a little bit of time off is fine by me.
That sounds good. It's always like when you're leaving public office, it's like, congratulations. I remember when I swore in my predecessor in South Orange, the mayor who was elected after me. There was the swearing in ceremony, and I remember being in the auditorium, and I swore her in, and then I went to the back of the room, and she went up on the dais. And I remember someone was looking at me. They looked at me, and then they looked up on stage and looked at her and looked at me, and they said, "I can't tell which one of you is smiling more right now." And I was like, "It's me. Trust me."
Yeah. Yeah, the amount of stress and just, you don't even know it, especially after so many years. It builds slowly. You get in there, you start to figure things out. Then there's expectations, people, policy. It builds. Now you have more roles, more responsibility, your leadership in a sense. It just grows and grows and grows. And then you have a campaign, another campaign, another campaign. Right. And they just get, somehow they get bigger, more, you're helping more people. You don't know, you walk away, you're done, and it's like, oh, was I carrying all that weight? Right. And it's not always bad, right? Because the impact you can have, like national standards out of Montana on civil liberties, and it's like, that's cool. Yeah, that was my job. There was nothing more important, but also like, hey, I get a whole new career and a reset. That's I can't complain again about that.
No. And I think some of the my listeners and viewers are probably going to hear from you in the future when we dive into some policy stuff. That'll be really interesting to talk to you more about. But for folks that are watching this episode right here, talk to us a little bit about the first time that you ran for office. It's such an intimidating and kind of daunting experience. Obviously, we've both kind of weighed the pros and cons and decided to jump in. And I think both of us are pretty glad that we did. But facing that in the beginning can be so daunting. So walk us through a little bit about what that first campaign was like. What were you nervous about? And how did you confront those things? And how did it go?
So my first campaign, I was 25. And I was not known. I'm from a town that's very small, 50 miles away from the city I'm in now. So no name ID, no connections, no school, nothing. I knew these people's parents and anybody. I was an unknown to the T. Now you gotta like set the stage a little bit. We're a more rural state, so our districts are smaller, and we also have donation limits. So that's something that you gotta take in consideration when listening to the story. But the whole goal, and I realized this even years before I ran for office when I wanted to do this. I wanted to do this in high school, believe it or not. And now I'm, twice that age.
Well, let's not talk about that too much.
And I realized I can Yeah, it's weird. We just keep getting older. It's a crazy concept. So I basically realized something a long time ago. I have to knock doors, right? I have to knock a lot of doors, and that means time. So I had to give myself a lot of time. Now, what do I say on the doors? What material do I have? How does it work? How do I raise money? How do donation letters work? All like, what do I spend the money on? All were unknowns, right? And luckily, I did have some friends I met in high school and college who have been in the political realm. So that helped validate me, but I still had no idea what I was doing. So I was running, I didn't have a primary, so that was good, but I had a general opponent. So I had to learn quickly on like, who do I send donation letters to? Okay, got my grandma, family, got that, like college friends. I was 25, so most of them were just starting their career and
Right.
didn't have a lot of money. And it's like, what am I? So I ended up raising some money. Word got around that I was a viable candidate when I didn't have a primary, but the word only got around after I knocked doors, and I pretty much 4 months of my campaign, I put up all my campaign signs, and people said, "Holy cow, this guy's putting the work in. He's got sign locations. Like, we know he's working hard." So that was some good validation. But before I got there, I spent January, February, and part of March calling my entire district, and I called through the list. It wasn't it wasn't Republicans. I'm a Republican. It was everybody. So I called everybody through that list, and then I started through it again, because in Montana, it's cold out and we can't go knocking doors in January, February, March, right? And at this point, I knew it was just a general campaign. So campaigns in November, I had started in January. Kept making those phone calls until it got warmer, and then I hit those doors. I hit them religiously, like 4 hours a day. Weekends were the worst because that was an 8 to 10 hour day, and I mean it. It wasn't like I dropped some door hangers like people. I knocked door after door, registered voter. I knocked every door, and that probably wasn't the best strategy. But what do you know at the time, right? You just do what you think is right, and you knock all those doors and you talk to people. And I talked to thousands of people, and I mean that literally, for as long as they wanted. Now, you got to put into consideration our districts are 10,000 people. So if you're running in a district of 50,000 people, well, you might want to target voters. You might want to get that data list. That data list means you got to contact your party, which probably has it, or the county clerk and recorder, the voting election office, whoever it is. So you know who to talk to, because you don't want to waste the time, and time is precious. But I talked to a lot of people, and I gave them my full time. So if they want to talk for 1 minute, they got a minute. If they want to talk for 10, 15, 20 minutes, they got the whole thing, and I looked at them. I didn't look at the next door, got bored, looked at my phone. It was full attention, listening to an extreme. And here's the other problem as a new candidate. I didn't know a lot, and like, just to say, not just the age thing. You could be 65 or 20. It doesn't matter. You're not going to know about industries you never touched. You may have read an article here, known a friend in it, but you're not going to know the ins and outs of it. So it was a lot of, listening and sharing what I thought, the values, but I didn't have that deep insight. And for me, I'm a verbal learner, so I learned a lot on the doors of what was important to people, so then I can kind of figure out policy-wise, perspective-wise, messaging-wise, how people thought, which was why the doors were so valuable, and I think made me a very good legislator. But at that time, it was like blind, just knock, knock, no idea who was going to open that door, where the conversation was going to lead, or if they're going to tell me, get off my lawn, I don't like your party, which rarely happened, actually. People were genuinely nice and just happy to have the candidate at their door, and a young candidate at that. People loved, and they still love, young candidates. Like, you're young, good, because those guys suck. Doesn't matter if it's your state, your county, the U.S., like federal government, people hate them all. So anything different in this world, I think, is usually a good one. Now, I'm going to pivot, then I'm going to let you, then we'll interact a little bit more. But there is another side of it. If you're getting party approval and you're younger, sometimes they may say, well, you haven't served your time, you haven't been a big donor, you haven't got the marks, or that you need to be a good candidate. So there can be some major frustrations and complications there of who's this guy and why do they think they have a right? I've been here and I think that my friend who's the ex-banker is the better candidate who has a huge Rolodex and can raise a lot of money. So there are some definite challenges of the age discrepancy or disparity, but I think overall there there's pros and cons. So I gave you a lot of information. Where do we want to take it from there?
Yeah, so no, that's all really helpful, I think, for people. One of the things that I wanted to follow up on was, it sounded like as you're going door to door, not only are you contacting voters, registering voters, but you are learning about the issues that were important to them. I'm sure you had some ideas of what was important to you going in ahead of time, but talk to us a little bit about what it was like going. I mean, I think people who haven't run for office and haven't gone door to door like that, it's hard to really wrap your head around what an experience that is. So talk to us a little bit about that. Like, what was it like and how much did you learn from people?
So between 3 campaigns, just to let you know, I spent a year of my life outdoors. I mean, 4 hours a day at least for an entire year. 4 months, 3 months, and 5 months was what my campaigns added up to, and roughly, and those some estimates. But the big one is nobody wants to hear your pitch as much as they want to share or vent. And so you walk up to a door, you're a stranger, I'm talking to you. You gotta create in a few seconds, get them to share. And nobody wants to share with a stranger. So what I did my first campaign, which was awesome, and I got a little direction, was I had a little survey, 5 or 6 questions. What do you think about property taxes? What do you think about gun rights? What do you think about the US Senate election going on? I don't know, 2 or 3 other issues. And people just shared. And at that point, I opened the door, and then we had multiple things to talk about. And at the very end of it, I always asked for a sign location. That was my last question, right? Because they invested 10, 15 minutes in me. You know what? We like you. And we got to vent to somebody and share our thoughts. You listened, and better you than somebody I don't know. So
And when was the last time someone listened to them in that way?
Nobody. That's exactly right. Some people, I'd go back. I'd say, okay, I got to go. It's been half an hour, but I'll come back afterwards when it's getting dark, because no one else wants you to knock on their door when it's dark. It's creepy, right? Like, so I'd show back up, and then we'd sit down and engage in conversation. And it's like, okay, like let's finish. Nobody listens. Nobody cares. They want to talk about, I'm going to do this. If you're new, don't make a promise you can't keep. And B, listen. Like, that's how you get the best voters. And then they'll tell everybody in their, church or local community, hey, I talked to that person, and what you're saying about them is not true. And I like them, and they might not even be my party, but at least you can stop the negative spread of information and get some buy-in.
That's great. Those are such good tips for people that are thinking about this on so many different levels, because not only is it an effective strategy for engaging voters, as you're talking about, it's also the ability for you to learn what's on people's minds. And all of us have our predispositions to what we think is going on, but that's never complete. And it should never be complete at any point in our lives. And this is a really good chance. I mean, like you said, you're talking to hundreds or thousands of people one by one. The amount of information that's coming in there can be really valuable. You might uncover things you had no idea were issues in a community.
That's exactly right. Like, there were issues that were top legislative issues that I heard one time in a 5-month campaign it was one of our top 3 legislative issues that was the biggest fights. Nobody in my region knew or even touched on it. What they cared about were their taxes and, healthcare. And some guy gave me a laundry list of like, okay, this is really dirty and we need to figure out how to clean this up and do this. And so I followed through. I showed up back to his house. I sat down and said, here's what the city councilman said about this issue. Here's what they're going to do about here. Here's what's going to happen here. We sat down and we had a beer. It was great. He's like, no one's actually followed through. He's like, you actually did? I said, yeah. No one's actually given me a list of things to do. So, So, yeah.
That's great. That's great. I mean, yeah, that's got to feel so good from their perspective. And so I guess one last kind of question here is, based on, so you spent a pretty solid chunk of time in the legislature. Could you reflect a little bit on, what running for office was like. Did that leave you with any ideas or skills, or did you learn anything about yourself, even if you hadn't, let's say you hadn't been elected? Does the campaign itself kind of impart any knowledge?
The campaign, I guess I look at it, there's people who are, one of our old US senators here used to say there's show horses, no horses, and work horses. And show horses love to show off, and they continue to campaign during the legislature. So they talk about the big issues. But then there's the no horses who don't really want to do anything. And then there's the work horses who realize policy is complicated, and to change it, you have to get really involved in it. And so I went from being a show horse, because that's what I learned from a campaign of like, you got to present an issue, to when I rose up through the ranks of, I got to figure out how to make this complicated issue work, right?
Right.
And it is not easy. And over time, I turned into a workhorse where I cared less about that press release coming out or whatever I got recognition for, to actually getting the job done. And that fundamentally changed me. I mean, I would love to talk to myself 8 years ago, because we are two different people, and there's a lot of growth, and I just see the world from a different perspective, right? But the campaign, I think it taught me that people are decent, and it really did. I barely got kicked off doors. People were genuinely nice. I mean, I learned how people thought, and that was really helpful. But the other side of the coin was enacting policy in a little bubble, and that was kind of what changed me fundamentally. But that's a whole different set of stories.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a longer episode about that, because I think you've got a lot there that would be interesting for people to hear about.
Campaigns are just stressful, man. You just got to. Yeah. It's just a lot. Can you get a strategy, implement it, and pivot continuously, and realize how to have a end goal and reach it and win, and figure out your marketing plan, figure out how to raise the money, figure out how to keep your soul in place and not trade it to get more donations. Well, I don't really care about that issue versus like, this one was important to me, but now I'm going to throw it out the window because of this. You got to figure all that out. So there's the campaign mentality. But it's almost like setting up the rules before you play the game. So once you get elected, you have to make sure you didn't screw yourself in the campaign, because so many candidates do. They try to be something to everybody, and they pigeonhole themselves, and then they are either frustrated, find themselves useless, or basically have to break their promises, and that's not a place you want to be.
No, that's another great point. So this has been really helpful. I think this is valuable for people thinking about this a little bit. For those that are listening and watching, make sure to check out the full series on how to run for public office, a nonpartisan series provided by the podcast here. Definitely expect to hear more from Dan in the future about some of the policy initiatives. So thanks again for hopping on here quickly and sharing a little bit about that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And we'll talk to you soon. And again, rethinkingwithalextorpy.com. And you can find other ideas, lessons from other folks that have run for office, and check out the full series.